Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Shavis, Perek Beis, Halacha Beis, and maybe beginning Halacha Gimel. We are learning Daf Tes. We left off on Daf Ches Amid Beis, second to last line in the Amid, in the beginning of the Gemara. And quickly reviewing, in the Mishnah, in Halacha Beis, we learned about many activities, right? Many farming activities that are permitted up until Rosh Hashanah on the 6th year, up until Rosh Hashanah of the 7th year. That means during the entirety of the 6th year, because as we mentioned, either what you're doing is for the existing 6th-year crop, or because even that activity on Shvi'is is only Asr Midrabanan, and therefore even during the time that we're speaking, all during the time, Be'isr Shnei Perakim, that there were many activities like plowing, which is what the Mishnah mentions explicitly, that wasn't only Asr for 30 days prior, but already began from Shavuos, began from Pesach. Nevertheless, the many activities in this Mishnah and in the next Mishnah will be permitted. Now, I want to go over a couple of details as a prep to getting into today's daf. Number one, the Mishnah mentioned that plowing a Beis HaShalachim, or a Beis HaShalchin, everyone pronounces it differently, that's fine. A Beis HaShalchin is a field that does not use only rainwater. It's a field that is constantly being irrigated. So we learned to the Mishnah that you are allowed to plow, to be chodesh, a Beis HaShalachin, all the way up until Rosh Hashanah of the 7th year. And here's the key, even when there is no existing crop. And as we emphasized at the end of the last year, there's a huge difference whether there is an existing crop, which would make things more permissible, as we'll see in the beginning of today, versus if there is no existing crop. And the chiddush of the Beis HaShalachim is that even if there is no existing crop, you can be chodesh, you can plow all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. We're going to learn today about the unique way that you farm a rice field and how that would play into the laws that we are learning about right now. The Gemara is going to provide various definitions for some of the words that we used in the Mishnah in Halacha Beis that we'll get back to. The Gemara is going to bring additional procedures that are permitted until the 7th year. Now, we will introduce today the concept of Maras Ayin, and coming off Masechtas Kalayim, it's going to be really fascinating because as we will see today that there will be some activities, some procedures whose permissibility will depend on Maras Ayin, meaning whether it looks like you're working the land or not, as we'll see. Another big shtickle will comment today, which will be the following. All labor on trees that is prohibited on Shvi'is, let's begin with that. Don't forget, the Torah writes explicitly in Bahar that you're not allowed to prune a vineyard, and that really doesn't only refer to the vineyard or to vines, it refers to all trees. So here's the big rule. Any activity beyond pruning, if it is la'avruye ilanam, that means if it's going to promote the growth of the tree, that indeed will be prohibited. And even though we mentioned that the tuldois are only midrabanan, okay, so it's asan midrabanan, but any type of labor on a tree that's going to fall into the category of le'oikoime or le'oikume ilana, which means to protect the tree or to prevent the tree from getting harmed. It's not promoting growth, right? It's not asay toiv, it's just surmira. That is something that will be okay, as we'll see today. Now, finally, I want to review this now because we're giving the words of introduction. But at the end of Halacha Beis, we had a machloikis in the Mishnah. And again, it appears, there are three opinions that are brought down. Let me quickly review. The Mishnah, in the beginning, the Tanakama joined together pruning, thinning, and removing decay. And that is mekarsamin, mizardin, umefaslin. I know I mentioned that mefaslin, when we learned the Mishnah, some say mefaslin means to chisel off all of the branches. That's way beyond pruning. People did that in order for the trunk to thicken. So let me just go back to the words of the Mishnah, whether it is pruning, thinning, or removing decay, whether it is pruning, thinning, or removing all the branches, it's called mekarsamin, mizardin umefaslin. The Tanakama says you can do all of these three until Rosh Hashanah of the 7th year. Rabbi Yeshua says, and Rabbi Yeshua only mentioned mizardin umefaslin. For some reason, Rabbi Yeshua did not mention mekarsimin. He said, you're kidding, mizardin umefaslin, which means thinning and removing decay, is even allowed on the 7th year. Even allowed on the 7th year. Very lenient. And Rabbi Shimon holds, and he only spoke about mefaslin, that mefaslin is only allowed on the 6th year during the time that you can plow, which means on trees only until Shavuos and not after Shavuos. So the Gemara is going to analyze Shitas Rab Shimon, and we will also clarify the Shita of Rabbi Yeshua, as we'll see. That's the whole Gemara until the new Mishnah. If we'll have time to learn the new Mishnah on the end of Daf Tesamid Beis, the Mishnah, like we mentioned already, will continue to list agricultural laborers that are permitted on the 6th year, all the way until Rosh Hashanah, where there is no Tosefah Shvis. Let's see how far we'll get. But Chaver, let's jump right back inside. Daf Chesamid Beis in the beginning of the Gemara. So the Mishnah mentioned that you can be mezabil, that means you can fertilize. Uma'adir is to hoe, which is something similar to plowing. It's not plowing, it's similar to plowing. The Mishnah mentioned that you can do that on a field, Vlad, of melons and gourds, clearly, all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. So just to remind everyone, first of all, this is a great picture. Second of all, I want to remind everyone that there is a huge difference whether you have an existing crop versus on the 6th year, at the end of the 6th year, versus if you don't have an existing crop. So what the Mishnah seems to be saying, that for you to be allowed to fertilize or to hoe only on those two fields, you have to have two conditions. Number one, because it exists. Number two, it's only because it's melons and gourds, which people commonly planted all the way up until Rosh Hashanah, which implies that all other species, even though they are an existing crop, it's a big chiddush this, you can only fertilize and hoe up until the time that you are allowed to plow, which is what we learned in the beginning of the first chapter and the second chapter. Okay, with the only exception, and again, I'm just reviewing, the only exception is a beis hashalachin, which means fields that do not suffice of rainwater, fields that are irrigated, are fields that are used by the farmers the whole time, that's why they irrigate it. There, you can plant, any crop could be fertilized and can be hoed all the way up until Rosh Hashanah, and more than that, by a beis hashalachin, even if there is no existing crop, you can also fertilize and hoe, because people plant until Rosh Hashanah. No one will even think, there won't even be a maras ayin that you're doing something for the 7th year. Okay, but here again, we're not speaking about a beis hashalachin, we're speaking about a field that lives off rainwater. People normally don't plant after the rain season. However, the chiddush is that for these two, for melons and for gourds, that already exist, you can fertilize and hoe up until Rosh Hashanah. Now, what the Mishnah did not mention is plowing. So the Gemara begins by asking, when you have a field planted with either melons or gourds or both, and in other words, you have an existing crop, ma'olachresh mehem. Now hold on, I want to make something clear, just to say the words. If you have empty land that has nothing existing, of course it's forbidden to fertilize and to hoe. Guys, halt cup, that's for sure. You will only be allowed to fertilize and to hoe only until when? I'll go until Pesach, right? Because this is not a beis ha'ilan. This is a anything other than trees until Pesach. The question here is about an existing crop. I want to add something else. Did we not learn, guys, before, in the Mishnah, that gourds either combine with netiyos, and according to the Shita, I think of Rab Shimon ben Gamliel, of Atana, even only gourds, if you have 10 of them in a beisah, you can plow until Rosh Hashanah. The Gemara said that. And the answer is, yeah, of course. The chiddush over there is that if you have 10 gourds that are spread out evenly, you can not only plow under the gourd, but you can plow in the entirety of the beisah. Here, we're speaking about You don't have 10 in the Beisah. We're not looking to plow the whole Beisah. I want to know whether you can plow directly under it. Directly under it means, again, it's not existing. If it's existing, if you have already a gourd, the Mishnah says you can be mizabel and you can be ma'adir. What happens if you don't have anything yet? Empty land. You plan to plant gourds or melons. I'm not looking to fertilize the whole Beisah if I'm not going to plant 10. I want to fertilize only the minimum needed for that little plantation. That's the Gemara's question. Are you allowed to lachatchila plow when you have an empty land? Now, today's Daf Tes answers the Gemara. All of that clarifies all of there's a lot of noise here in the noise of Kalim, and that it flows beautifully. So we quote a Braisa, and from the Braisa we extrapolate the answer. The line of the Braisa is only one liner. The Braisa says, Tanin Daf Tes, Kolzman Sha'at Muta Lachroish. The Braisa says, whenever you are allowed to plow, then you are allowed to be Mizabel and Ma'adir. What does that imply? This is now the Gemara is adding, that so says the Marafolda, that im ein at muta lachreish, that whenever you're not allowed to plow, so that ein at muta loy lezabel v'loy la'adir. In other words, what is the Gemara trying to say? That since you are allowed to fertilize, you are allowed to hoe when you have already existing melons and gourds until the very end. So we're going to say, that's the Gemara saying, that yes, you are allowed to plow for them all the way until the end of the 6th year. Look inside that Asher Ilyo, they're all the way on the top of the right column. The Umeshane, the Gemara answers, based on the words we have in Otei Sefta. And it's only one line. Kolzman sha'at muta lachrish, at muta lezabel, v'hai nuscha de b'raisa pshita de meshabesh tehi, period, uminam. Now, the Gemara is implying that daikinon the im ein at muta lachrish, ein at muta lezabel la'adir. Now, but in our Mishnah we learned by an existing crop that you can be mizabel ma'adir b'mikshois ad Rosh Hashanah. Elot must be that the lachroish nami shari kederech shemut lezabat ad Rosh Hashanah. Okay. Furthermore,
saying that you could even plow. Forget by hand.
Yeah, yes. And again, but everyone asks over here, hold on, Vlad, didn't we learn that you have to have 10 deluyon? If you have 10 deluyon, then you can plow the whole Beisah. Here, you cannot plow the whole Beisah if you don't have 10, but you can plow directly what's needed for that. Okay, now, another proof that you are allowed to plow even Charisha when it comes to gourds and to melons, if that's the plan, all the way up until Rosh Hashanah. Amar Rabbi Yosi, umasnisa Amar Kain. Another Braisa. What's the Braisa say? Mizabelin uma'adrin b'mikshois u'midlois ad Rosh Hashanah. Right, mizabel uma'adrin. Mishnah doesn't say the word plowing. Now, v'chein beis hashlachin that we already had in the Mishnah, beis hashlachin means that if you have a beis hashlachin, any crop can be plowed, can be mizabel uma'adrin until Rosh Hashanah. And v'tani Allah, and we learned in the Braisa that when it comes to the beis hashlachin, chodeshin beis hashlachin ad Rosh Hashanah. And again, guys, I want to make it clear, by a beis hashlachin, you are allowed to plow even if there is no existing crop. So the fact that the Braisa, the fact that we put together, the Mishnah puts together mizabel ma'adrin b'mikshois, v'chein beis hashlachin, and we have a clarification that by a beis hashlachin, plowing is allowed. So I'm going to extend the permissibility of plowing by the mikshois and the midlois. Okay. I want to, okay, one thing. I don't know if I said this correctly. If you don't have mikchois and midlois, you for sure cannot plow. There's no debate about that. Question is, can you plow when you have them? And you have to have 10 in the base. I'm not looking to plow in the whole base. I just want to plow underneath them. So even though the Mishnah only mentioned mizabel and uma'adrin, the Gemara is saying that if you already have them, then you can plow until Rosh Hashanah. Okay, that's clear.
You can plow.
Beis hashlachin, you can plow and you can fertilize and you can hoe even if you don't have an existing crop. And by gourds and melons, by a beis halavan, by a non-irrigated field, if it's not planted, you cannot. The whole topic is it already exists.
And what's the rationale for the distinction between gourds
and is that we said we need to have two atadim. right? First of all, if something is permitted on the 7th year, midoiraisa, it's going to become more permitted. Plowing is not permitted. We already established that. We're learning our sugya that plowing is also midoiraisa. Halacha l'mishmisinai, implied from a halacha. Nevertheless, when you have a field that everyone plants until Rosh Hashanah of the 6th year, because there's always water, it's always a plantable land. So if you're going to be plowing it, you're doing it for the existing, you're doing it to plant, and there isn't even a maras ayin, as we'll see. That's also, we take that into account. Everyone knows people have irrig. Why you're not wasting your water? Why would you be throwing water in a field 2 months before Shvi'is? No one is planting on Shvi'is. Why are you throwing water? Because you want to plant now.
So the characteristic of the gourds is that it can grow up to
gourds can live off
end of the
much
year.
less water. Therefore, gourds and melons is something that people plant later in the season. And even there, just to emphasize, if you did not yet plant anything, you can't do anything for it. Our whole topic is that they are existing. They are here already. The Mishnah only said mizabel u'ma'ader. The Gemara is being mechadesh. You can also be chodesh. Okay, now says the Gemara, Rabbi Yomer. Right. So now that we mentioned that you can be, now let's a little bit about the Beis HaShalachim, David. Okay, it's very simple. You have an irrigated. You have to become we have to be connected to the land. You have an irrigated field. We clearly learned that you can plow. You can plow even though nothing is planted until Rosh Hashanah. Hold on, it shows a passion. So Rabbi Yomer, I agree. Principally, you can do it until Rosh Hashanah, but it doesn't mean mamish Rosh Hashanah. It has to be ad lifnei Rosh Hashanah shloisha yamim, 3 days before. What's the magic of 3 days? Because I'm allowed to plant on the 6th year. But planting means not putting the seed in the ground. Planting it for it to take root. You need 3 days for it to take root. The Gemara is going to challenge it. It takes much more than that. For you to be able to plant something for it to take root, for you to put a sapling, a tree in the ground for it to take root. In other words, Rebbe agrees in principle that you are allowed to plow until Rosh Hashanah, but he says that practically you can't do that. Because if I'm putting something in the ground, then it won't even take root before Rosh Hashanah. So when will it take root? On the 7th year. That I can't do. I can't plow for something that's going to take root on the 7th year. The problem with Rebbe is not what he's saying. It's just the practical of what he's saying. It's only 3 days. That the elu oisin shirashin l'shleisha. What are you talking about? It's not true. Which you tell me what species takes 3 days? It takes much more than that. Forget about trees that take way more. Even vegetables, it takes more than 3 days. So the Gemara amends the girsa. Rabbi Yomer ad lifnei Rosh Hashanah shleisha chadashim. 3 months. Now we're going. It's a bomb. I get it, guys. We learned this together in Babli Rosh Hashanah. We know 2 weeks. We know about 1 month. We know about taking root. So I get it, not 3 days. 3 months. What are you talking about? There's one thing that takes 3 months. Let me just say it by heart. Unique rice patties. The way people planted rice is that they planted it twice, just to know the way it works. How do they plant it today? You can Google it. I didn't do it yesterday. First, they planted it in a small area. And once it began to sprout, they uproot it and they spread it out and they replant it. There's 2 steps. That procedure takes 3 months. I'm reading it inside. Rabbi Yomer, ad lifnei Rosh Hashanah shloisha chadashim. But what is he talking about? Kedei sheyizra oires. For you to have enough time to plant the rice. Rice is planted very close together, and it takes root. And once it takes root, v'yita oires v'yashris, then they would take it out and they would spread it out all over the field. And this is a procedure that takes. In other words, he's saying a chumrah uniquely by rice. Now, what about not rice? So that's the big thing. Is it not rice that you have to have whatever time it needs to take root? Or Rebbe holds that even though it takes a few weeks for things to take root, if you plant it before Shemitah, you're good. Only not rice. Because rice, when you put it in the ground, you don't leave it there. In the first planting, the way they did it then, maybe they do it now. Since you plant it and you remove it and you replant it, that procedure takes 3 months. Masha'inkin, by all other products, even though it's only going to really take root into the 7th year, Rebbe agrees that if you have a Beis HaShulachin and you're planning to plant on the 6th year, you can plow it on the 6th year. Weiter. Fascinating. In the Mishnah, now we're going back to the Mishnah. Forget about the 3 days. It was a girsa. 3 months. You can only plow a beis hashlachin that you plan to plant rice up until 3 months before. Period. Anything else, you can plant until Rosh Hashanah. You can plow until Rosh Hashanah because you can plant until Rosh Hashanah. Even though it's going to take root later, you didn't work the 7th year. You worked on the 6th year. Don't forget, whatever will grow in the 7th year, you have other restrictions. Don't think that you planted it and you're good to go. You can harvest it only for you to eat. It has kedusha. There's biur. Doesn't matter. But if a person wants to plant on the 6th year, even though they know that the yield won't be theirs, gesundheit. Okay, right. Let's move.
Still planted the same way, Rabbi. It's done 25 to 50 days.
Okay, 1 second, huh?
They can plant a mamish up until.
That's what it says over here. Yes, understand. Yes, Kevin, I'm sorry. Kevin, what?
I was saying it's planted the same way. After 25 to 50 days, they transplant it.
Today,
Rice.
right?
Yes.
Okay, Kevin is saying that's the way they do it today. Rice is unique. It's planted twice. Amazing. 50 days. Get back cook. That's a yeah. Vlad is checking his machine. Maybe his machine will give you a different thing than your machine. No, it's going to give the same thing. Vlad, he's insisting, Kevin. Okay.
That is wrong.
Okay. Now, we had in the Mishnah, we already interpreted the Mishnah based on what the Gemara says. That you are allowed to be miyablin. What does miyablin mean? Miyablin means mavirin asayabelos, removing the warts that you can do until the whole 6th year, until Rosh Hashanah of the 7th. Then the Mishnah says mifarkin. What does mifarkin mean? Mifarkin means be'olin. You remove the excess leaves. Ma'apkin means that you put dust on the roots. I want you to know that in the next Mishnah, we're going to have another statement regarding dusting, and we're going to have to come back to this and understand what's this and what's that. So a lot more about the placing the dust. And ma'ashnin means masnin law. The right girsa is putting smoke. They used to smoke the trees. That was the way they had then to get rid of the worms or get rid of certain bugs. Yeah, they still do. I'm sure we got better at it or worse at it, whatever it is. Okay. Now, the Gemara is going to add other procedures that the Mishnah never mentioned. Lehetera. Tony, we learned in the Braisa, you are allowed to be mechavin, and you are allowed to be mitzaded. Mechavin means to make straight. Mitzaded means to make crooked. So what are we talking about? Says the Gemara. The Gemara is now explaining the Braisa. Mechavin Allah means that a person is allowed all the way up until Rosh Hashanah to take measures that will straighten out the tree. That's simple, David. Your tree is growing. We all have this in our backyards also. And many trees don't go straight. So they put as a wood and they just tie the tree to it. So when it continues to grow, it will straighten itself. In other words, it's going to be effective on the 7th year. You're putting it out of Rosh Hashanah on the 7th year. Even though the whole thing is to straighten out the tree on the 7th, you're allowed to do it. You're not working the ground. You're fixing the tree. That's okay. Mitzadadin is the opposite. Mitzadadin means what are you trying to bend? So Chavrai Amri, the Chavra explained, that they would make stakes. They would make stakes that would do the opposite. It would put certain branches to the side. One of the reasons why people had trees is they wanted shade. So Ashlamazal, you planted your tree because you like sitting in that corner in your backyard, but the branches are growing in the opposite direction. So again, it's the opposite concept of straightening it. There were techniques of how they would make the branches go crooked. So either they would put a stick. Rabbi Yossi says another way they did it was they would put stones. Evan. They would put a weight on the branch that they wanted to redirect, and then because of the weight, it would grow in that direction. Okay. Now let's go even better. Now we're going to learn about activities that are even allowed to be done on the Shemitah year itself. Tony, we learned in the Braisa, mevatrin. You can remove to be mevater. I know it's a Yiddish. It's not Yiddish, but people use it a lot. To be mevater, to be foregoing. But here it means to be removing. Mishamten, and you can withdraw. So what are we talking about? Mevatrin. So look inside. Chevra derash serilio. There's so many ways of teaching this. Derash serilio on the left side, a little bit before halfway down, around 10 lines from the top. You see it? Mevatrin. So he says the word mevater and the word mishamet is the same thing. Hainu mevatrin, hainu mishamtin. Ella, if we're speaking about a vine, a grapevine, we use the word mevater. Bigafanim karim mevatrin. And if you have reeds, we use the word mishamtin. What does it mean, guys? It means that if they are two packed together, something is removed. Something is removed to allow the remaining to grow better. Now, this is a shocker. This is a big chiddush. What are you talking about? That means on the 7th year, this is not pruning. I'm going to make it clear. Pruning is us and midoiraisa. Pruning is taking a vine. The vine is there. You're not removing the vine. You're removing certain offshoots from the vine, which will strengthen the rest. That's us and midoiraisa. So you would think that this is us and midrabana. I know it's not exactly the same. The answer is no. Because anything that you're doing, the kavana, I said this in the introduction, if it's to make something better, then you're not allowed to do it. Anything that's preventing something from getting ruined, that you're allowed to do. Anything that strengthens the tree is at least asan midrabanan. Anything that I'm doing, my kavan is I don't want to strengthen it. I don't want it to get ruined. When things are packed too much together, it kills each other, gets ruined. I'm removing it getting ruined. That I'm allowed to do. And indeed, the Gemara says, what the Braisa is saying, like we just read in the Rashirilio, it's the same procedure. Furthermore, the Braisa says, that if people will only do it before Sukkot, then they can do it until Sukkot. Certainly, but if people even do it afterwards, then they can do it afterwards. Now, why would Sukkot have to do with anything? So here's where we're really introducing the concept of Maras Ayim. So there's two steps again. Step number one is anything that you're doing, not to strengthen what remains, but you know that if you're going to leave things the way they are, it will get ruined. You can take away the michshol. But the problem is that not everyone knows you're doing that for that purpose. There's a Maras Ayin issue. So if it was common for people to do it only before Sukkot for the next season, even though it's already the 7th year, then you can do it. Only if everyone would do it even later in the season, then you can do it, because there won't be a Maras Ayin issue. That's what the Rashirilio says, again, in the left column. Doesn't look like you're working the land. He's saying something else. He's saying that you can remove it because you want wood for shade. That's the sukkahs. What happens if I want to remove woods for shade? That's my intention. So if I'm doing it before, many people only did it before sukkahs for schach. Verstehst? It doesn't even look like you're doing avodah. One thing is clear, I can tell you right now, the Gemara, we learned this together somewhere in the Bavli. Pruning is a growth stimulant. This is removing something that's ruining your tree. So it's already not so bad. Eloma, it looks like you're working the land. So you have to make sure that it doesn't have that appearance. Marasayin. Now, Reb Shimon Oimer. Shimon says, "Ubelvad min habiko l'mailom." That, if you remember, whoever went to the vineyard with Gabriel, so they showed us on the vines these nuts. If you remember, mamish by the pruning. So he says like this: is that for you to succeed in not allowing this vine ruining the neighboring vine, either remove the whole thing, avadan. If you remove it from the way down, it's already you're gonna weaken it so much it's not going to ruin the neighbor. Rab Shimon is saying, but you cannot remove it all the way off the ground, because now it looks like you're working the land, you're clearing the land. Ubulvad, remove the reed, remove the vine from the bikov. Bika means the lowest knot. Ulamayla. But you cannot go under the lowest knot, because it will always look like you're working the land. Now, Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rabbi Shaya and Rabbi Yaakov Barach in the name of Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanin and the name of Rabbi Chami Avoy, the Rabbi Shaya say that not only can you remove it from the lower knot, you can remove it all the way out. That noitel min hakavutzinima means not only can you remove it from the ground, but you can remove it with everything that's gathered to it. What's gathered to the vine? What's gathered to the reed? The roots, sometimes neighboring offshoots. You can completely remove it. Why? Because everyone will know that you are removing it for personal use. I want to add something. Personal use would mean, like the Rash Arilio says, like before Sukkot, you want schach, or you need to have firewood. I want to make, if your kavana is to better anything, it will never be allowed. Your kavana is something should not get ruined. In addition, you want to use it. It's not about the land. You want to save the neighboring tree, and you want this material. As long as that's apparent, you can do work on the 7th year. Let me say simple words. Are we allowed to cut schach on the Shemitah year? Answer is yeah. You're not allowed to prune. I'm not pruning. I'm getting schach. I wonder if you're taking schach in a way that you are making the tree better. Maybe that won't be allowed. Psikresha. But if I'm removing something, it's not going to make it better. Normally, removing is a tulda of pruning. Here, it's going to be permitted. Yes, okay. The Mishnah says, Rab Shimon Oimer, that af noitel hu, and the girsa that we had is as he'ole min ha'eshkol bashvis, that you can take the leaves off the clusters, even on the Shemitah year. Frekti Gemara, Rab Shimon appears to contradict himself. That mechalfa shitasi de Rab Shimon, we're from what Mishnah, because Tanin on Tamon is in this Masechta, on Halacha Zayin, in the same Perek actually. On our dafim, on daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis. Yeah, in the same Perek. Tanin on Tamon, later on we're going to learn Mimmarsin Eso Oides Bashvis, that you are allowed to steer the rice paddy on the Shemitah year. What are we talking about? People, just to know the way it worked by rice paddies against, they would flood the rice field and then they would steer the mud. We're speaking about rice that took root before Rosh Hashanah. This is important. Since it took root before Rosh Hashanah, it's not a product of the Shemitah year. So the Tana divided up Shimon. Avoloi mechaschin, but you cannot trim the rice plants. Why? Because the Torah says lois is moidu, and Rab Shimon holds that anything that looks like pruning is prohibited. So if anything that looks like pruning is not allowed to be done on the 7th year, even like in the case of the rice field where it didn't even grow on that year, it really took root on the year before. So over here, and here Rab Shimon is saying that you are allowed to take the leaves from the clusters during the Shemitah year itself. Problem is, it looks like you're pruning. The Torah says lois is moidu. So answers the Gemara, finally, turning to Daf Tesamid Beis, Shanyu Achi, here it's different. Here, yes, Rab Shimon is giving a leniency. Shukamatzel min adleikom. What does that mean? Like we mentioned before, when you trim, my friend, rice plants, when you trim rice plants, even though the rice took root before the 7th year, that trimming will stimulate growth in the rice. Anything that you are doing to stimulate growth, it's called la'avruye ilana. I don't care if that product grew on the 60. If it's now on the ground, you're not allowed to do. The Torah says lois is moidu. Any activity that you are doing that will not stimulate any growth, and not only that, it will prevent something bad from happening. That will be something that you are allowed to do. Gewaldig. The Tatmara Fulda. That netila se'alin, when you remove the leaves, you're not stimulating growth to the vines. All you're doing is that, imagine if there's a fire. Can I put out the fire, David? God, if there's a fire in my vineyard on the Shemitah, I can put out the fire. The Torah says don't prune. I'm not pruning. I'm not making it better. I'm just getting rid of something that's going to destroy it. Hachinami maser hamazik lohem. Avol gaba oides in the Marafulda. No. Moyu lohem hazimur. And therefore, Rab Shimon holds that even though, yes, the rice is a product of the 6th year, but still you can't prune on the 7th year period. Also, ba'oides. Gavaldik. Okay.
So you can cut leaves if your you have a grapevine and you want to cut leaves, you're doing it, if you're doing it for the purpose of avoiding fire or ruining the.
Mamish, that's a very big thing. And then Vlad, one other layer, Marasayin. It's okay. That's the two things we learned today. I don't know how to apply it. I'm just saying that's what we learned today. Every day I feel like we're learning big things in the beginning. So we learned the nafkamina between bettering is pruning, removing a problem is theoretically allowed. On top of that, you have to make sure that it doesn't look like there is a marasayin. So we have to learn more. We'll see. Wherever we don't make up marasayins. We never make up marasayins. Wherever Chazal said a marasayin, we have to adhere to it. Okay. The Mishnah said also that you can clear stones. Skila means to stone. Skila means to remove the stones. Misalken ad Rosh Hashanah. Now, what does that imply? It means that on the 7th year itself, you're never allowed to clear stones. Says the Gemara, I got a problem. Astira. Why? Tamon taninon. Now, this is moving on to the 3rd chapter of Shvius, and the same is Sechta. Pei the Gimel Halacha Hey. In our pagination on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis, the Mishnah writes, guys, listen to this. Hamasaka l'sadeo. If a person is clearing his stones on the Shvius year, you could do it sometimes. Noitel esol yoinois. You can remove the stones that are not directly touching the ground. You can remove the stones higher off the ground. As long as the stones touching the ground, you leave. Umaniach es anoiges ba'aretz. Okay? In other words, I'll tell you one thing. What will be the problem of moving stones, David? I'll tell you, you are preparing the land for cultivation. It's preparing. If you left the lowest layer of stones, then you haven't prepared. You're allowed to do it. So the bottom line is that the Mishnah clearly says that even on the 7th year, there is a certain type of misaklin that you are allowed. And here by implication, it sounds like that no clearing is allowed. So answers the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yoina, I'll tell you like this. Over here, kan doesn't mean over here. That discussion in the yeshiva was when they were learning Daf Chav Gimel. So when Rabbi Yoina said kan means there. Oh, over there, where the Mishnah says, if you the El Yoinas, yeah, only not the Noigas Ba'aretz. That is where the stones are not attached. They are already detached. In other words, there's a problem, David, of preparing the land for cultivation. Plowing is cultivation. If there's a stone that's attached to the ground, and when you remove it, psik reisha, what are you doing? You're making a furrow in the ground. That's plowing. Oh, kan b'mechubar. In other words, even if there are layers of stones, guys, even if there are layers of stones, you have to know how to imagine it. If the top one is somehow attached, even though when I remove it, there'll be another stone. I cannot do anything yet. But if my removing even of the top stone will somehow move the ground, that will also be usher. Because that's already an act of plowing. I love it. Okay. Now, to halt kop on this last shtickle, I just want to review like this. I'm going to say one more time in English, Hebrew, and then we're going to say the words in the Mishnah. The Mishnah began with 3. Mekarsemin, mizardin, umefaslan. Mekarsemin means to prune. Mizardin means to thin out. Umefaslan either means to remove the K, or mefaslan means to trim all the branches, which is way more than pruning. It's an avodah they did to make the trunk thicken. Mekarsemin, mizardin, umefaslan. What about those 3? So like this, the Tanakama says these 3 are allowed until Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Yeshua, for some reason, didn't speak about mekarsemin. That's where it got confusing. Rabbi Yeshua said that on the 2, mizardin umefaslin, even on the 7th year. Rab Shimon says, mefaslin, even on the 6th year is prohibited. Mefaslin is done on trees. We learned in the beginning of we learned the whole first chapter. The whole first Pedic is that trees, when can you do the avoid of trees? Until Shavuos. So Rab Shimon is the most machmer. He says that faslin only until Shavuos on the 6th. So what's not clear? I'll tell you what's not clear. Rabbi Yeshua, what will Rabbi Yeshua hold by mekarsemin? What will Rab Shimon hold on mekarsemin umezardin? When you read the Mishnah, it's like there's 3 opinions, but they're not speaking about. It's not clear if they are speaking about all the 3 or they're not speaking about all the 3. The Gemara Mamash has to clarify the meaning of this Mishnah. Rab Shimon is the most machmer. It sounds like he's machman only by mefaslin, whatever that means. That cannot even be done on the 6th year, can only be done bisman that you can do avodah sa'aretz. That means until Shavuos. So the Gemara begins by analyzing the sheet of Rab Shimon. So Amar Rabbi Yosi, that's the Amoida. That Havin on Sovereign Meimar, initially, what did we think? What was our Havamina? That since Rab Shimon only spoke about Mefaslin, Rab Shimon never mentioned Mizardin, Rabbi Yeshua spoke about Mizardin. That Rabbi Shimon will hold like Rabbi Yeshua by Kirsum. See, even Rabbi Yeshua never mentioned anything by Kirsum. So let me just say like this. The Gemara already begins as a given. The Gemara already takes it as a given that even though Rabbi Yeshua explicitly only said Mizardin or Mefaslin, even on the 7th year, he also meant Mekarsamin. Okay, so now we already have one step. So the Tanakama allows the 3 only up until Rosh Hashanah of the 7th. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, these 3, Mekarsamin, Mizardin, and Mefaslin, even on the 7th year. Even on the 7th year. Well, like, why did we say? Because it's the product of the 6th year. Rab Shimon only argues on Mefaslin. So Rab Shimon will be min hakotze el hakotze. It'll be very difficult to understand. Rab Shimon will hold that Mefaslin is even usher on the 6th year after Shavuos. And on the other 2, on Mekarsamin Mizardin, we thought that Rab Shimon holds like Rabbi Yeshua that you are allowed on the 7th year. The inun train kanoyin. So as far as Mekarsamin is concerned, and as far as Mizardin is concerned, not Mefaslin, there's only 2 opinions. The Tanakama holds that Mekarsamin and Mizardin until Rosh Hashanah, not after Rosh Hashanah. And Rabbi Yeshua and Rab Shimon, at least we're lafushi machloikas, we're trying to minimize the machloikas. They hold that Mekarsamin and Mizardin even after Rosh Hashanah. Period. And this is how you have to read the Mishnah. Misaklin ad Rosh Hashanah. No one argued with that. That's what we just learned right now. And on top of that, Mekarsamin and Mizardin and Mefaslin ad Rosh Hashanah. That's the Tanakama. Rabbi Yeshua oimer kizeiruda ukepisula shel chamishus v'chein shel shishus, like we explained. And we already are saying that Rabbi Yeshua, even though he mentioned Zeirud and Pisul, he's also talking about Kirsum. So at least when it comes to Mekarsamin Umizardin, there's only 2 opinions. That was the Havamina. Says the Gemara, it's nisht azoy. It can't be that way. What is it? It's a 3-way machlokes. However, really, the Gemara says, the Gemara doesn't tell you how they came to that maskana. We don't know how they got there. But when they had the discussion of the Beis HaMedrash, they concluded that there are 3 opinions. And the 3 opinions is the way we learned the Mishnah. The Tanakama holds, opinion number 1 is Misaklin ad Rosh Hashanah. And not only that, but Mekarsamin and Mizardin and Mefaslin ad Rosh Hashanah. Opinion number 1. Okay, that's the shita of, we're going to call Tanakama's the Chachamim, Rabbanan. Opinion number 2 is Rabbi Yeshua Oimer. Rabbi Yeshua, again, is not only speaking about Mizardin Chavra, Rabbi Yeshua is speaking about all 3. Mekarsamin, Mizardin, Mefaslin. You can do it on the 7th year. But he's explaining why. Why can you do it on the 7th year? Because these activities you're doing to that which is a product of the 6th year. That was his lashon. Kizeruda, kepisula, shel chamishis. Just like when you do zirudu pisel of chamishis. When do you do it? You do it on the 6th year. So the same thing is that if you're doing these activities on the 7th year, it's the product of the 6th year, and therefore it's permitted. You can do it even on the 7th year. Okay. In other words, Rabbi Yeshua is more lenient. Afilu yoiser mikan. You, the Chachamim, hold Mekarsamin, Mizardin, and Mefaslin only until Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, you can do it even later. Rab Shimon Oimer, Rab Shimon is the most machmer. Why does he say that Kolzman sha'ani rashoy ba'avodah so'ilan, only when you can work the trees, which is Shavuos, ani bepisuloi. And what is that? That is ad ho'atzeres. In other words, that Rab Shimon argues by all the 3. Everyone is speaking about all 3. Rab Shimon holds that Mekarsamin and Mizardin and Mefaslin can only be done until Shavuos of the 6th year. So we have a
question in general. Can you do stuff in order to save the produce from 6th year on the 7th year? you planted something on the 6th year. Can you save it on the 7th year?
Seems like according to Rabbi Shua, you could.
And Mamish, it seems like that's our machlekes.
No,
That's-
I'm
I
saying
think that's our
as a
machlekes.
Mederaita, are you? Is this
No,
a
we're talking about Midoraisa, Midorabanan. That's the machlekes. We're learning big things in the beginning of the Masechta. We're saying Yekav, and the answer is machlekes Tanoim.
Okay.
The one thing is clear: the Chachamim hold that on the 7th year you can't do that. Period. Rabbi Shua holds that we look at when is this is a product of which year. If it's a product of the 6th year, you could do it. Now we're not talking about harvesting kederach. We're speaking about doing things to the tree that
save it.
Well, it's more than saving it. It's saving it and it's making it better. It does both.
Making it both.
Because removing the wart, we learned in the Mishnah, you can only remove the wart on the 6th year. Removing the wart, it takes away the bad and it makes this tree better.
All right,
All right, to be continued.
Wow.